Hello and welcome to Cover Story. We are beginning the year with a very interesting guest. I have with me Mr. Amitabh Kant. He is the Sherpa for G20 and he's come out with this book, How.India Scaled Mt G20, the inside story of the G20 presidency. First of all, congratulations, Mr. Kant, on a book that I must say you have made G20 interesting for all of us, for lay people like us who don't have so much, an understanding of the finesse and the cut and thrust and also what went on behind the scenes. I think what you achieved is amazing. Both in the book and of course on the floor on G20.
Thank you.
A little bit about you also. Mr. Kant has been, his story itself is pretty amazing, I must share with my viewers. He was a sub-collector in Kozhikode. So from there to his, he was also part of, he was the CEO of Niti Aayog, and then he was part of the Make in India, Startup India campaign. He was the brains behind it. So it's been a journey from where to where, Mr. Kant. I must compliment you on that.
Thank you.
And first, let's talk about the book and then we'll talk a bit about you. You've spoken about the elephant in the room. That chapter, I think, is one that everybody talks about. So how difficult was it? What were the bigger challenges when you took the job
So it was a very complex scenario. It was a post-COVID era. About 200 million people had gone below poverty line. 100 million people had lost their jobs. Global growth had slowed down enormously, and there was a challenge of climate, but the most critical challenge was the Russia-Ukraine war. Correct. And that was impacting food, fuel, fertilizer, everything. And in the midst of all this, the Prime Minister of India was going to be the leader of G20, and he wanted India to be very ambitious, very decisive, very action-oriented. He also felt that India should do its G20 presidency in a very, very different manner. Instead of hosting it in the capital, do it in every state and union territory of India, which means hosting about 230 meetings in over about close to 100 destinations. So the logistics of hosting the G20 was quite enormous. But more than that, in the complexity of what was happening internationally, the challenge of multilateralism is that you need to bring a consensus on every issue. Even if one country opposes it, then it's not an accepted document.
It's not a consensus.
It's not a consensus. And therefore, without consensus, it's a failure. And it was very important to bring consensus and bring it at a very high level of ambition. And that, to my mind, was the real challenge because we were confronted in a grouping which had emerging markets, which had G7, which had Russia, China, and which had countries like Turkey, Saudi Arabia, all of them together. So to get a consensus on all key issues was quite a challenge.
You said 280 venues or 280 meetings, you had 300 bilaterals and 16 to 17 drafts, I think.
No, that was with reference to only one para. One para. That was the geopolitical para where we spent close to about 300 hours, 250 bilateral meetings.
For just one para?
One para. So we took about, imagine 16 drafts on that failed. And it was the 17th draft which finally we bulldozed with, and that was quite a challenge to be able to get everybody around.
Are you good at poker? Because you write 45 minutes ago you thought it had failed and you're going to call the PM and say it's not working. And 45 minutes later you called him to say we have a draft.
So it was
How did you manage?
It was a challenge because the important thing is that when you fail, you should be able to come out quickly with another draft and keep negotiating. Keep moving forward with everybody. And, there were different perceptions, different outlook. You have to get them around. And there were various challenges. Every word matters. Every letter matters. And you have to actually do a lot of cajoling, pleading, but you also have to be a very tough negotiator. You have to intimidate, you have to be tough. One stage, I had to just tell all of them that what the Prime Minister had told me, that if we are not able to get consensus in G20, which is the premier body, because the United Nations had already failed, the Security Council had failed, and if G20 is not able to achieve a consensus, then India will not work with G20. India will rather work with BRIC and IPSA. And that is what I conveyed to them, that it's the responsibility of every single Sherpa to come around and bring a consensus. These are global issues on which the lives of citizens matter. These are issues on which all of us have a stake, and therefore we were able to rally everybody around with a huge amount of pressure.
The pressure was that we will walk out if you don't come to the table.
Well, we said that, but we also pleaded with them. We also built up personal relationships. We built up partnerships. We built up coalition. But I think the reason why we succeeded, probably one was the stature of the Prime Minister is very high. And secondly, I think India worked with the group of Global South. So we had 12 countries which were supporting us throughout. We negotiated along with Brazil and South Africa. We were instrumental in getting African Union a membership of G20, made it G21. But all emerging markets were with us. And because all emerging markets were with us in a group of 20, if you have 12 countries backing you up, then it becomes very difficult for G7. We had very tough challenges with the G7, but we managed to ride over it. When after 16 drafts had failed, the last one meeting that I took, the 17th draft, which I knew everybody's red line, and I said, take it or leave it. This is the final draft. I will not negotiate anymore, because I had already done over 300 rounds of meetings. I said, I will not negotiate. This is the final draft. And if anybody opposes it, I will not negotiate. Please ask your leader to go and talk to my leader. And the leaders had already come into Delhi. So I said, please ask them to talk to my leader. I will not negotiate. And I said, this is the final draft. And in the next, I gave them a time limit up to 3 a.m. because the meeting was to start at 9 a.m. And by about 4 o'clock, I had the consent of all the G7 countries except the United States of America. In the morning at about 7:30, I phoned up the American Sherpa and I told him that I have the consent of other countries and I want your consent. So he said, I'll get back to you. I'm talking to President Biden right now and I'll get back to you shortly. And he got back to me in 15 minutes. He said that they will agree with the draft subject to two conditions. One was that they wanted change of one word. And the second was, and every word matters.
Right.
The second was that they wanted a consent of Russia and China before America agrees. So the previous night, after I'd given the final draft, the Russian Deputy Minister Pankin with the Sherpa had come to my room here. And they said, we will not agree to the draft, include the word sanction, elimination of sanction. Now, I knew that was a red line. The G7 will never agree to that.
Correct.
So I told him it's not possible, it's not feasible. So he said, in that case, we will not agree. Then I talked to Mr. Jaishankar and, finally we decided that we'll tell them that if you do not agree, we will get Zelensky to be the first speaker after our Prime Minister finishes. Because Zelensky had spoken in Indonesia. G7 was telling us to include Zelensky as a speaker. We had not agreed because the Prime Minister's view was that G20 should be only the G20 leaders and nobody from outside.
Right.
So we'd not invited him. But because the Russians were pressurizing us, we had to finally pull off this of Zelensky. And once we said that, they realized that he will say all kind of things in the meeting against Russia. They promptly agreed. They agreed. Now, the next day, once the Americans said that then I had the consent of Russia, but I still didn't have the consent of China. So I got in touch with the Chinese Sherpa, and the Chinese Sherpa then said, pulled off a googly. He said that we agree to everything. There's one line which says that United States will host the G20 in 2026. He said, my Prime Minister is saying that please remove that line. We will not allow the United States to host it in 2026. So I said, why? You've already agreed. So he said, no, they don't give us visas. They don't give visas to our governor from Hong Kong, etc. So please remove that. So I said, that is not possible at this stage. So then they said that, then get us a written guarantee, a legal guarantee that they will issue visa for us. So the meeting of G20 leaders started at 9 o'clock. From 9:15 till about 1 o'clock, I was negotiating with the US Sherpa and the Chinese Sherpa on this one issue.
Wow.
And finally, I had to tell them that instead of a written guarantee, and it was very difficult for the written guarantee because in America, the written guarantee has to be vetted at very high levels, so legally. So I said that use the English word, since I'm a native English speaker, the word insure is better. And finally, US gave a letter saying that we'll ensure that visas are issued. That was clinched at about 12:45, and at about 1:30, we made the PM announce that the document has been clinched.
Why did you announce it that day and not the next day?
Because, you know, it was, we managed a consensus now. Everybody had agreed after about, 12 days of non-stop negotiations. And we didn't want to leave anything to chance. So this was discussed with the PM. We felt that everybody has now agreed. If you leave it for the next day, then several new countries will open up new issues, etc. We had a very good consensus. Our document was very ambitious. It was very, forward-looking document, and it was a progressive document. And therefore, we discussed it with other leaders as well. And other leaders felt that if you have a consensus, let's go ahead and announce it. And the Prime Minister announced it to a huge amount of applause from all the leaders, G20 leaders.
Yeah, I'm going to go on the document a bit more, but you said there was one word the Americans wanted changed.
Yeah.
What was that word?
Well, I won't tell you that.
We're going to wait for the sequel?
No, that would not be fair. So I haven't mentioned that in the book as well.
Which I thought I might have missed it. Okay.
No.
So I read the book properly. But Xi Jinping did not come. Was that a setback? How did you react to it initially?
Well, I think it was a blessing in disguise that he didn't come. Because he'd come to Bali in Indonesia the previous year, and his meeting with Biden for 3.5 hours overwhelmed the G20 completely. That meeting took center stage, and G20 went into the background. Whereas here our objective was that G20, the Leaders Summit, remained center stage, and it remained focused. China was represented by its Prime Minister, which was the right legal stature, and he was very positive and constructive. And, we had major challenges with China throughout the year, because they had not agreed to several of our terminologies, including Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. They had not agreed to women-led development. They had not agreed to life. Many of these, the lifestyle for environment. So we had a challenge all through the year. But then we were able to build a personal relationship with the Chinese Sherpa. And one of my colleagues, Ashish, built up that relationship. I built it up with the Sherpa. We managed to get them around. We pulled them around and got them around in the last, and they then fully backed India till the end.
You look like you really enjoyed it. Did you think you'd enjoy it so much?
Well, I didn't initially think so. I thought it's going to be, but it was very tough through the year. Once you achieve success, you enjoy it. But throughout the year, it was very tough.
I know, I'm seeing you smile, I think now. At that time, I think there was a lot of...
Oh, it was very tough. It was very challenging. It was complex. It was difficult. And it was a tough job.
So that hot summer morning when you get the call from the Prime Minister, did you ever think that this is what he's going to be offering you?
No, I didn't know. Actually, I'd done a long innings in Niti Aayog. I had retired in 2016, and I'd done about 6 years, 10 months. And I don't think anybody should spend so much time in one job, which is what I'd done on CEO Niti Aayog. So I'd actually gone to the PM as a final call on when he told me that go and join my Sherpa. And that proved to be a very eventful year throughout. Not only was he very ambitious in terms of logistics, but he was very ambitious in terms of outcomes. He was very outcome driven. I mean, I had to send him reports, situation reports when the negotiations were going on every 2 hours to keep him abreast. So he was very focused on outcomes. But he, to his great credit, and I have the greatest admiration because he totally delegated the nitty-gritty to me. And, I mean, as far as the negotiations are concerned, everything was delegated to me.
If you hadn't delivered, how do you think he would have reacted?
Well, he's very large-hearted, and I don't think he would have realized the complications of international politics. He would have realized how complex the world is. but he was pushing for the limits. The great thing is that he's bold, he's risky, he takes risks, and in this particular, because there was a lot of, he selected me and he'd given me the freedom to negotiate. Because of his backing, I could be bold, I could be risky, I could be gutsy, and that eventually paid off in this document.
Yeah, you have a nice, interesting chapter on the Prime Minister himself, which is also a good insight to know how it was working with him. And I think also leaders as good as the team he chooses. So you did him proud also.
So, you know, I wrote that because eventually G20 is about his leadership. I'm only his Sherpa. The Sherpa is meant to take the leader on top of the Mount Everest. So my job was really to act as a Sherpa taking him on top of the Mount Everest. So I can work only if I get his backing, his delegation, his many of his characteristics, and what I learned from him. That is about leadership in action, and what I learned from the Prime Minister.
And who were the others that you felt that who gave you support? You talked about the emerging countries, but apart from that?
Well, one is I would like to give credit to our own Foreign Minister, Mr. Jaishankar, who throughout the year built up.
And he's written the foreword to your book.
Yeah, he built up a lot of partnerships throughout. He's a very dynamic and a very vibrant and active Foreign Minister who has a global perspective, and I greatly benefited from that. And I think in terms of the interactions with the Sherpas, I really think that the United States fully supported us. They were very keen that India succeeds. They were very tough negotiators. They didn't compromise on their national interest, but they sent the message home that India must succeed. So they were backing us to the hilt, and I think their Sherpa, Mike Pyle, was a very good negotiator himself.
And who was the toughest? Was it the Russian?
In different matters, you know.
Or the most difficult to, most irritating, stubborn, not irritating is the wrong word, but stubborn.
So, well, in different matters, you know, in climate, Saudi Arabia was very, I would say they had a very strong viewpoint. And they negotiated in a very tough manner, very well prepared, but very tough. In the nuclear doctrine, it was France, which was, they had a particular viewpoint, and they stuck on to that till the end. And to my mind, on many of the issues, we had challenges from China throughout the year. We managed that. And then we had Russia and, different issues, different challenges all through.
But Mr. Kant, I must, before going for a break, I must compliment you on a very gracious book also, because you've also written not just about Mr. Jaishankar, but the other members of the team, who were there, who usually remain faceless, the backroom negotiators. You've also given a whole chapter on them, which I think it's
no, I had a top-class team.
Credit.
I had a team of very young professionals. I had my own team of Abhay Thakur, Naidu, Inam, Ashish, all of them were top-class professionals. And I think that professionalism paid out.
And it's, you share the credit, which I said is also very nice. But I'm going to take a break and come back, and we're going to keep the conversation going. So stay with us. Hello and welcome back to our cover story conversation. We are here with Amitabh Kant, G20 Sherpa, and we're talking to him about his book, How India Scaled Mt G20. It's got a very well written insider's account. And what I also enjoyed is that it's also it's an explanatory book also. You begin by telling us why G20 matters, how it was first a financial forum, then it became a geopolitical one. And these are issues that even Russia raised, saying that we're not here to discuss geopolitics. So what does G20 do?
So, the basic foundation is economics, and the economic crisis of the earlier years led President Bush to raise the stature to the leaders' level. He realized that the economic crisis is global in nature.
The Lehman Brothers. Right?
Yeah, the Lehman Brothers. And it had become very complex, and it would not be possible merely for the central bank governors and the finance ministers unless there's strong political and administrative will. So he raised it to a much higher level, and that particular year, 2 G20s were held in the United States of America. And subsequently, all the major crises of the world have actually been sorted out by G20. through the Bank of International Settlement, when there was major crisis in terms of the debt for many of the global south countries, several other issues, the COVID handling, many other issues, is the G20 which has been in the forefront, largely because the United Nations has become dysfunctional and the Security Council has been not been able to arrive at a consensus on any critical issues. So if you're able to arrive at a consensus in G20, you send out a message to all the multilateral forums, the IMF, the World Bank, the WHO, that this is what these countries are pushing for.
What in your mind was the biggest achievement? I mean, apart from the fact that you got a consensus, which itself is huge, but in terms of particulars, what was something?
So I think the biggest achievement to my mind from an Indian perspective was that we were able to get the definition as well as the basic principles of digital public infrastructure accepted. And that was important because in the western part of the world, technology development has been driven by the big tech.
Right.
It's been driven by Google, by Facebook, by Amazon, by Apple, and in China by Tencent and Alibaba. To accept that there can be a public interest layer on top of which private sector can innovate, there can be an open source, open API, interglobal models, that took us a whole year to accept. So that was one key achievement for India. And that will be the model which will now be pursued in all the global south countries. The second, to my mind, the biggest achievement for India was its ability to bring African Union as a member and make it more inclusive. G20 was made more inclusive by India, and that's a major contribution to my mind. And the third critical one was that we brought in ambition into the climate details. And that was important from two different ambitions. One was the G7 trying to push for an agenda towards 1.5 degrees centigrade, and the global south's ambition to get more finance. Now, how to bridge and marry them and ensure that you speak the voice of the global south. So to my mind, the achievement was that we push for ambition for the global south in terms of finance, and that is what the document reflected.
But also a bit about yourself, I began by telling them, but I was, I'm pretty interested in, how from where to where, Amitabh. It's feel like it's an amazing journey.
Well, I landed up in Kerala, and I was at one stage
sub-collector in Kozhikode.
Well, I did sub-collector, then I became collector in a district where Vasco da Gama had landed and discovered India. That's Calicut, now known as Kozhikode. And I was a young officer, and I demolished about 450 constructions. I cleaned up the heart of the city. I cleaned up the beach. I created 25 roads, and I created a new bypass, created a new airport, which was a public-private partnership. All this I did. I didn't know that one of the hotels, which I'd broken down later, one of the politicians went on to become a leading minister, and I suffered enormously, and actually I was without a posting for about 11 months. And I thought that was the end of my career. So as a punishment posting, I was posted as Secretary Tourism at that point of time.
I see.
But I took this as an opportunity. So, every crisis is an opportunity, and I took this as an opportunity to build Kerala as a tourism destination. There was only one product, which was the Kovalam beach, which had been, cheap tourists used to come, charter flights used to come, encroachment, filth, dust. So we closed it and we built up new products, the backwaters of Kerala. We opened up the houseboats where carpenters had gone away to Gulf. We got them back. These were the rice boats, which we created as a tourism product. We went back to the traditional Kerala culture, Kathakali, Mohiniyattam. We went back to Kerala Ayurveda as a therapy for a long term, about 21 days therapy. We went back to the Kerala martial art. We went back to the traditional Kerala cuisine. And we differentiated Kerala from the rest of the world. And that's how Kerala as a destination grew and was termed as one of the 10 exotic paradises of the world by National Geographic.
Oh, God's own country, that's...
Yeah, but we took it up the value chain from about a $20 a night destination to a $600 a night destination.
And then, of course, they came Startup India, Standup India, which is, I think, all the work in this whole digital thing also helped in G20.
Yeah, so much earlier, when I was Secretary Tourism, I got a call that Prime Minister wants to have a holiday. So Mr. Vajpayee came and spent a week in
The musings from Kumarakom.
Yeah, from Kumarakom.
That's right. Huh?
And no politician was allowed, but I was hosting him morning, day, evening out. And then one day, Mr. Brajesh Mishra told Mr. Vajpayee that this लड़के ने बहुत काम किया है, इसको tourism में लाना चाहिए. तो Mr. Vajpayee turned to me and asked me whether you've applied for Government of India. आपने apply किया? तो I said नहीं sir, मैंने तो नहीं किया. तो he said नहीं apply करिएगा, आप apply करिएगा तो ब्रजेश मिश्रा जी आपको tourism के बदले women and child welfare में भेज देंगे. So that was the end of the story. I applied 1 year, 3 months later. And I was to go to Finance Ministry, but the Prime Minister changed that order and brought me to tourism. As soon as I landed here, the Twin Tower blast happened in New York. There was war in Afghanistan. There was attack on our parliament. And there were travel advisories against India, and our tourism had slumped. So at the peak of that crisis, to restore consumer demand, when every other country had stopped tourism campaigns, we launched the Incredible India campaign. So that's how tourism grew. It grew in a big way in India that time, and the market-led strategy really led to the creation of new airports, etc. So I did Incredible India. And when Mr. Modi came in, I was Secretary, Department of Industries, so I did the Startup India, the Make in India, and later as CEO of Niti Aayog, I worked with him for a long period of time.
But your next book should be, I think, the life and times of Mr. Kant, but I'm sure there's a lot more before you end up writing that chapter. But finally, when you look back, you've written about moments of G20, but which was the moment that you remember?
Well, I think there were several moments, but finally it was the previous night when I had to tell them that take it or leave it. To tell, these were very senior people. They were all of the level of either national security advisors or advisors to the leaders, etc., to tell them that to take it or leave it. That was a tough call. And to tell them that if you don't agree, India will move out of G20, that was, you had to do a lot of...
to deliver that dialogue.
That was a tough call, I think. And then to walk out of not get into detailed discussion at that stage, because I had done all that discussion. So I just said this and walked out, and I said, this is final. This is the final draft.
And then you sat and waited for the phone to ring?
Yeah.
Okay, but finally also, this was by the, as you said, went down to the wire. So most people had written it off. The media was already speculating that this would be a failure. So there must have been some...
So, when a consensus was announced by the Prime Minister that this is the New Delhi leaders' declaration, by that time, almost all the foreign journalists already had their story ready that India had failed. They felt that consensus can never be arrived at. But they were really surprised and shocked that we had announced the declaration with a full consensus on 83 paras, a 7,000-word document where every word had been agreed to a day before. So they were really taken by surprise.
Was the Prime Minister taken by surprise?
No, the Prime Minister was fully updated. He was fully abreast. He fully knew about everything.
What did he say to you when you said we've got it?
He said it in whatever he said right after when he announced this, that he was thankful to the Sherpa. So he was. It was a great pleasure and a delight working for him. I must say that he was a big picture person. Gave all the freedom to negotiate. Extremely calm under pressure. So it was a delight working with him.
On that note, it was a delight reading your book. Thank you so much, and wish you all the best.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.